Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Strength and Conditioning for Strength and Power Sports. So in a short while, we are about to start the third day session of this webinar. So as usual, we'll be running a live Q&A at the end of the webinar. Third day session of this webinar. So we have enabled our chat feature. It is on the bottom side of your screen. So if you have any questions, just pop them in there. And if you miss anything, don't worry. We'll be sending around on demand the recording in YouTube. And as usual, we have today Dr. Abhimanyu also. He'll be again there today to give a sum up of the two presentations in Hindi, especially after the second talk. So hence, those who are interested to have a better understanding of this subject matter could hold on for some more time after the second presentation. So today we have with us Dr. Victor Selvanayagam from Malaysia for his first talk. Victor Selvanayagam completed his degree in sports science and master's in medical science at the University of Malaya. He received his PhD from the University of Queensland, Australia, in the area of neuroscience, where he focused on identifying early neural responses to strength training. Victor, who is also a certified strength and conditioning specialist, is currently a senior lecturer and the Deputy Director, Research and Development with the Center of Sports and Exercise Sciences, University of Malaya. He played a vital role in developing the first master's strength and conditioning program in Malaysia. In India, in fact, we do not have any strength and conditioning PhD or master's course. So we also have to initiate some courses like this so that our people are benefited from the strength and conditioning graduation and post-graduation and plus doctorates. So his main research focuses on the contribution of the nervous system to strength by incorporating well-explored motor learning paradigms to strength training. He also plays a consultative role in the area of exercise physiology and exercise testing and prescriptions. Ultimately, Victor is keen to explore and share his expertise pertaining to the science and fundamentals of human movement so that movement can be safe, effective, and efficient. Apart being an academician, he also has been an athlete for Malaysia, and at present he runs the Masters 400 meters and 800 meters runs. Let us welcome Dr. Victor to present his topic entitled Velocity Loss and Estimated Repetition to Failure as a Monitoring Tool for Resistance Training Intensity. Dr. Victor, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Saju, for the introduction. Yes, I think you've heard my interest and my main area for my PhD is the nervous system and strength training. But today I've decided to talk on a different topic, something that I'm also exploring with some colleagues, looking at velocity or estimated repetitions to failure as a monitoring tool for resistance training. So I believe most of us here are very familiar with resistance training, but I would like to just start with some introduction. I would also like you guys to key in some of the answers in your chat box. So to start off, maybe I'll just ask a very simple question. What are some of the benefits of resistance training? So quite straightforward questions. I hope I can see the chat box. Yes, feel free, just answer any anything that you think will come out of the benefit of resistance training. We have resistance training for athletes, elite athletes, even for general health. resistance training for the elderly. Even children are involved in resistance training. So maybe just a general answers. Are the answers coming in? Where's the chat box? All right. All right, help strengthen, okay, improve strength. We have bone density, muscle hypertrophy, fantastic. So we've got helps improve muscle mass, bone density, we've got power, we've got avoid injury, protect from injury, development of strength. All right, great. So I think most of you have covered all these strength elements. So we have things like strength, things like power. We also hear bone density. Fantastic. Okay, so I think everyone has got, yeah, I think most of the answers right. We could also look at strength training to help in kind of control of body fat also. We could look at increased mass for metabolic rate. These are some of the additional benefits, but generally to increase strength, to increase muscle hypertrophy. I think you're probably familiar with bodybuilders and people who want to shape, you know, and be involved in, you know, kind of muscle architecturing and yeah, just hypertrophy of obviously power for explosive sports and explosive events. You also can do strength training for endurance, muscle endurance. Yep. So that's fantastic. My next question is, when you train or when you do strength training or resistance training, what are some of the changes that happens physiologically? So when you do a weight training session, some changes happens in your body physiologically. So you can look at different systems in your body. I want you to just quickly highlight some of the possible changes. So I saw muscle growth there. I saw increased blood flow. So those are very acute things that happen, yes. Anything else? Development, muscle, fast twitch, slow twitch, muscle fibers. So you've covered the muscle very much. Great hypertrophy. Even I've seen cardiac, there's a nice long answer, hypertrophy. Neuromuscular development. Very good, bone density. So nervous system recruitment, I've seen an answer there on nervous system. So very true indeed, the nervous system is actually very much involved in adaptation to strength training. And obviously the muscle is also very involved. So I'd like to just give you a general overview now. My next slide would, all right, so in terms of physiology, we do have lots of changes that happens at the nervous system level. So what happens is now your nerve, or we talk about the neural drive, is you get a nice action potential to your muscle to recruit your muscles better. You get changes like firing rates, so you get greater firing rates of the nervous system. You've got greater synchronization of your firing. So what happens now is the action potential comes more simultaneous. The firing is better. So you got increased recruitment. You can also get changes in your brain, strengthening at areas in your brain that drives this the nervous system to recruit muscles better. So that's one aspect. Obviously, at the muscle level, you get increase in kind of strengthening of proteins. Then you also get increase in cross-sectional areas. So in general, with strength training, you've got nervous system change. You've got lots of muscle level change. And when you do resistance training, you want all this change to benefit your goals or your outcome. So if your outcome is strength, then you definitely would like the muscle to be able to or the nervous system to drive and recruit your muscles better. You want to probably increase your muscle girth to help in producing a particular amount of force. You also want to think of power. Then you're thinking of how quick your recruitment. So your recruitment rates are very important here. Of course, with endurance, you're talking about your slow twitch muscle fibers. So all these are fairly important because you want to make sure your resistance training meets the goals that you want to achieve. So in terms of training dosage, so we talk about some dose and response relationship. So we must understand that when you train, there is a response. Okay, so maybe I can just tell you a short story, perhaps on bone density. So if you have an astronaut who is now thinking of exploring to space, so if he had done a bone density measurement, he is very normal, very healthy bone. But when he is in space for assuming a month, what happens when he comes down, when you measure the bone density? In space, you do not have gravity, so the bones are not stimulated. You don't get enough stimulus for the bones to grow or to be strong. So there's no need. So when you come back, when this astronaut comes back to Earth, you find that bone density has dropped. So similarly, when you do your strength training, you are providing a stimulus that would help in the nervous system to adapt, in the muscles to adapt. So what should you give, or what are the dosage that you need to provide your nerve and your muscles so that they can change and be stronger? So if you look at some of the reviews today, in fact, there are many research that has been done on different dosage, intensity, that they consider how heavy should we actually lift, how many sessions should we repeat our training sessions, what's the volume like, how long should we train to get all these benefits. So in a quite recent meta-analysis looking at many different studies, so they've identified intensity being a very important dose that is required, okay, especially to improve strength. So what is the dosage here? So we have different recommendations, but in this meta-analysis, 85% is the dosage that's been recommended, as opposed to 80 or 75%. So this 85% is what has been accumulated by many different studies, and especially we are talking about the elite performers here. So athletes specifically. So this is not in line with older persons or just general public, but more for elite athletes. So 85% has been recommended. How about frequency? Would 2 training sessions or 3 training sessions or even more be better? So they found that there is no difference between 2 or 3 sessions, and 3 sessions does not benefit more than 2 sessions. So 2 is sufficient. So at least 2 training sessions, but with volume, they have done the meta-analysis based on muscle group rather than movement per se. So when you talk about muscle groups, so you're talking about just say the quadriceps, then how many training sessions should be conducted on the quadriceps? So the volume here, the recommendation is about 8 sessions per week. So in the accumulative week training, 8 sessions. So besides intensity, frequency, volume, other studies have showed training period. So the longer you are involved in training, the better your strength gains. The time you spend your muscles under tension, so under load, is beneficial to your strength gains. So today I'm just highlighting a few of the dose that you need to provide. So these are also known as kind of training variables. So what variables are involved? And intensity is what I want to emphasize today. is something which is very critical, and we need to be able to monitor intensity well. So if you look at my next slide, here, these are some of the probably typical guidelines for strength training goals, where if you look at the figure on your right, you will see strength is very much at a high loads, and as the number of repetition increase, strength gains are much lesser. So strength is very much at a 85% and above levels. Then we have power, we have hypertrophy, and we also have endurance. If you look at hypertrophy, it's somewhere between 85 to 67 to 85%. So this is the typical recommendation by the National Strength and Conditioning Association. I think you're all well aware of 1 RM. So 1 RM is 1 repetition maximum. So if you're aware of 1 RM, usually what happens is you would like to know this number. What is my 1 RM? What is my 1 RM for a squat? Is it 200 kgs? So you would probably have to do an assessment, a specific protocol to establish what is your athlete's 1 RM. Of course, this is can be quite time consuming, and there is also risk of injury if you're not familiar with this protocol. There are other ways to calculate 1 RM. There are indirect methods, so it's safer a little bit. You do it at a little lighter loads over a number of repetitions, and you have the load and the repetitions put into a formula. There are quite a few formulas available, and you can also identify your 1 RM. So once you have your 1 RM, what you would want to do now is design your training based on the percentage of 1 RM. So these are very much very traditional ways of using 1 RM as a means of testing and as a means of training. So to provide training loads for your athletes. Is it currently being done? Yes. So it is currently being practiced also. So we're all using this. I think, in fact, most athletes will know what's their 1 RM. And the typical design is to identify each individual's load. And then when you design your training, you're having a percentage being placed. For example, if you want strength, let's train at 85% of my 1 RM. So those are ways that you are identifying with. So on this slide, there are different repetitions, rest period, even volumes throughout a week that is recommended. I have a summary on the next slide. So this is the general NSCA summary for improvement of strength. More than 85% of 1 RM, repetitions less than 6 sets, 2 to 3 sets. And of course, rest period is critical. You have a longer rest period here. So these are information that you can find in journals. You can get this information in textbooks. But on a day-to-day basis, coaches, with this guide, you want to have feedback every day. You want to know whether is this load sufficient? Is this load making a change? Is my athlete getting stronger? Because 1 RM can change very quickly. In fact, 1 RM, if you monitor it every week, you're going to get much increments. Or you also have issues on day-to-day issues with athletes. They may be tired, they may have a long day. So for that particular day, their 1 RM may be much lower. So by just having an intensity, percentage of intensity prescribed, it could have a little bit of variation here. So my next slide is, I'm going to ask you another question. Okay, let's, so how do we monitor training intensity? So that's my question now. How do we monitor training intensity? Maybe in your chat box, you can just attempt to answer. Probably most of you are already doing something with your training. How do you monitor? What do you use to monitor your training intensity? You'd like to just attempt at the chat box? Could it be something subjective, or could it be something objective? What do you think would be a good way? Fantastic. I see heart rate. Yep. So I've got quite a few who've highlighted heart rate. So I assume with a heart rate, when your heart rate is much higher, you assume that the intensity is higher. Is very high. Okay, so I've got also RPE, rate of perceived exertion. So yeah, many of you are highlighting rate of perceived exertion. Great. So you perceive, you ask them, how do you feel, or what's the effort from a scale of 0 to 10? Give me your effort in your intensity today. So yeah, so we've got here heart rate and RPE, which is probably most common. Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. So in fact, this is what I would like to highlight today in this talk on some of the tools that you can use for measuring. And in fact, heart rate would be one, and RPE is something else. Okay. The tools that I'm referring to here, a subjective tool that I want to introduce today would be RPE. Is RPE the best tool for us to measure? Or I would like to introduce something which you may have also used, which is called estimated repetition to failure. So now you get your subjects or your clients to estimate how many more do you think you can do? You've just finished a set. How many more repetitions do you think you can do? And another one is repetitions in reverse. So this is another scale. So if you say my repetition in reverse is 10, that means I can't do any more. If it's 9, I can do one more repetition. So with strength training, your repetitions are probably very, very crucial or critical. Something more objective would be pass to failure. That means if the subject fails to execute any more contractions, then you find that that's his maximum. Or something else that I would like to introduce today is using velocity. So could we use velocity to measure his maximum loads? So if he's moving slowly, is it that the load is very light? If he's moving if he's moving very slowly, is it that the load is very heavy? In fact, because it's slow, right? If he's moving very fast, is his load now very light? So you have things like light loads and heavy loads, and you find velocity playing a very important role. All right, let's move on to a small activity. Okay, I'm not sure whether we are able to do this, but for those who can, especially the younger guys out there, if you can do me a favor, if you can do 20 push-ups or 20 squats, so you could just kind of do a 20 squats. Oh, I think push-ups will be good for the young guys. All right. After you finish your squats or your push-up, I want to ask you a question. How do you rate your effort? Okay, so how do you rate your effort from 0 to 10? 0 being very light, you are relaxing on the chair, just watching TV. and 10 being maximum effort. There's nothing more that you can do, and you're totally exhausted and you can't do anything else. All right, so that's one question I want to ask you. And number two is once you finish your 20 push-ups, my question is, how many more can you do? You finish 20, in 5 seconds, I want to ask you, how many more can you do? So I just would like some feedback. 20 might be easy for some of you, but let's just see. Anyone who can attempt, please try. Yeah, I've got a few attempted. All right, that's good. Somebody says 5 more. That will be how many more? How about RPE? RPE probably 4, 5, 10 more. I can do 20 more. Fantastic. All right, so we've got quite a few answers here. Probably RPE is about 4. 20 push-ups. Okay, it's no problem at all because someone can do 50. All right. Okay, fantastic. So now my question is RPE and how many more you can do, is it matching? That means if you say I can do 10 more, so I presume your RPE should be about 5, you know, so you're just moderately affected, you can still go for another 10. So is it matching very well? Is RPE the best gauge to measure the intensity of your load? All right, so someone says RPE only 3, of course, because it's very light here. So let's talk a little bit more about RPE now. So RPE has been something which I think most of you have used. In fact, through your chat box, I think everybody has highlighted RPE. So traditionally, RPE is used for aerobic activity, a lot more aerobic. And if you look at the scale, it used to be the box scale. We have 6 to 20 in the box scale. So 6 being the starting point, very, 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 very light indeed, and 20 being very heavy. I did ask a question, why do we have this box scale? You know, why 6? Why do you start with 6 and 20? So odd number. It should be 0 to 10. That's something easier to understand and reflect. Well, with terms of box scale, I assume what they were doing is trying to match it with a heart rate. So if you take a 20-year-old subject or 20-year-old client, and you notice this 20-year-old client has a maximum heart rate of 220 minus age. So we use 220 minus age, it'd be about 200, right? So if you look at this box scale, if you reach a heart rate of 200, that's maximum heart rate. So you have a scale of about 20 there. And if you notice, when you say 130, so it's somewhat hard. That's about, so the matching, this RPE scale for box scale is probably trying to match the heart rate values. So something very light will be your resting heart rate of about 60. Okay, so that's your resting heart rate. So this is traditionally where the box scale has come about, from more aerobic type of activity. And then it was modified with some patient population to look at 0 to 10, something we are familiar with today. So we have 0 for nothing at all, and 10 will be maximum effort. So when you say you reach 10, we assume you cannot do any more. When you say that you can achieve probably about 6 or 7, we assume that you can still carry on with a few more repetitions. So traditionally, RPE was used for aerobic activities. But today, it's also been used for strength training. And would this be the best measurement? So we find that there is quite a bit of mismatch between I think your clients or your athletes RPE. Sometimes what they feel is, I think I give my RPE a 7 or very hard. But what we found out that with 7, when you ask them to do more repetitions, they cannot do any more repetitions because muscle has reached failure, but perhaps the effort and the exertion is still not up there. This is quite in opposed to endurance activities where some athletes are underestimating themselves. So they say, oh, I've reached maximum, but they actually can still go on more. Here is the other way around with strength training. They feel they can do more, but what happens is now their repetition, they've already reached maximum in terms of muscle fatigue. So your muscle can fatigue and your perceived exertion may not be accurately describing your fatigue of your muscle. So in this case, there is always a risk of injury. And we want to avoid injuries. If you ask your clients or your athletes, and they tell you that I'm only at 5 or 6 in terms of fatigue and effort, so the coach may likely add more loads, or the coach may push them much further, and this can induce a risk of injury. So we want to make sure we are capturing the right subjective score. So a score that I would like to recommend, and something that has been studied more recently, is something called the estimated repetition to failure. Let's have a look at this scale. So in this scale, this was, of course, it was novel then. This was in 2012-13, so quite a few years now, and more studies is being done on this. They use this scale, which actually kind of just ask the question, how would you rate, how many additional repetitions could you have performed? So if you say I can do anything 10 or more, you were given a score of 10. And of course, if you say 1, then we know that you can only do 1 more. If you say 3, you can only do 3 more. So this has been studied by Daniel Hackett from Australia, Sydney, the University of Sydney. And he has looked at this area or this aspect of measurement. So what he's found in his experiment, so his experimental session goes like this. It's a warm-up session of 8 to 10 reps at moderate load. And then he performed 5 sets of 10 repetitions. And of course, the load that has been selected is approximately 10 reps. You should be max. And then you should be fatigued by 10 reps. And he immediately after 1 set of 10, he would ask the question, what is your RPE? How would you rate your effort? Okay, so first question is, how would you rate your effort, all right, in doing this? And the second question would be, how many more additional repetitions can you perform? All right, so 2 questions. 1, effort. 1, how many more additional sessions or repetitions can you achieve? All right, and after 5 seconds, the subject or the athlete will do an actual contraction all the way to fatigue. Okay, so he will immediately after doing the 10 repetitions, we will ask 2 questions. After asking these questions, the subject will now perform an actual repetition to failure. Okay, and this is what he found. The first thing is there was a very high correlation between estimated repetition to failure and actual repetition to failure. And I was just looking at the data specifically, and we found that so for example, if you say I can do another 5 repetitions, so your error, right, is only about 5%, 5 to 10%, which is so you would actually be able to do another 5 to 6 or perhaps 4 to 6 repetitions. So you can look at the results here. So first point is a very high correlation between ERF and ARF, right, which is the actual. Number 2 is RPE underestimates. So RPE underestimates the amount that they can actually perform. Okay, and ERF is actually much better when you're doing it at a later sets. So the first set may be not as strong as the following sets. Okay, so it gets much better when your ERF is small. That means if you can only do another 3 repetitions, then your ERF is probably will be almost exact, which is 3. Or if you say, I can only do 2 more, so most likely your ARF is 2. But if you say 10, I can do 10 more, then it is not as strong, the effect. So if you say 10, perhaps you can do 8 or 12. So the error is a bit larger when it is a little bit larger, but when it's when you perceive as a smaller number, then your ERF estimate is very much more accurate. Other than that, when he did his study, he found chest press shows a greater finding than leg press. So it's even more accurate for chest press compared to leg press. Men are a little bit more accurate than women with leg press. So this is another finding. So men are able to estimate their repetition to failure better than women with leg press. And he also found that there is no difference whether you are more experienced or not, but perhaps further studies need to be done on this. The final experiment that he conducted was looking at, so this one he found a stronger correlation with ERF and a weaker correlation with RPE. Okay, so I think similar to what I mentioned earlier. And yeah, so this is the final experiment that Daniel Hackett conducted. He also wanted to look at perceptual fatigue. So not just RPE, but also something on perception. So perception of fatigue, he asked a few questions. How fatigued do you feel? Number 2 is how exhausted do you feel? Number 3 is how tired do you feel? And number 4, how drained do you feel? So these are additional questions that was asked, and the scale was a 1 to 7 scale. So it is not just the RPE, which is what's your effort, but he asked them the question on fatigue, on exhaustion, on tired, on draining. All right, so what he found was, again, a small correlation between perceptual fatigue and ERF accuracy. There was a stronger correlation with the actual repetition to failure, and ERF is more strongly associated to the capacity of the task performed. All right, so this is what Daniel Hackett in his study found. So the recommendation here is besides using RPE, we would recommend that you use ERF. Ask your athletes how many more repetitions you can do after the end of your set. So that will give a fairly good idea on their fatigability of the muscle. So if they assume that they can do many more, then you could adjust your loads to be much higher. If you find that they have already reached almost failure, then you may want to reduce the loads. Okay, so asking how many more additional repetitions that you can do is a fairly good subjective measure. If you look at the articles, there's another term called repetitions in reserve. Actually, this is quite similar to estimated repetition to failure. So it is probably by, depends on your choice of which scale you want to use. With RPE measuring repetitions in reserve, so they use the same scale as RPE, but when you say I've got RPE of 10, that means you're saying that I got no more reserve in my tank. Okay, so I cannot do any more. So when I reach 10, I've got no more repetitions to do. If I have 8 in my RPE or repetition in reserve here, that means I can do 2 more repetition. So this is another way of asking the same question. One question is 1 to 10, how many more can you do, which is your ERF, and the other one is telling us that you have reached maximum, which is 10. So either way, the recommendation is, besides asking how they feel or how much effort or how fatigued they are or how exhausted your athlete is or how drained or tired they are, ask them the question, how many more do you think you can do? That will give you a much better assessment of the athlete's performance at that time. And as coaches, we can adjust the intensity based on that subjective measure. So if it's they can do many more repetitions, then you know they are still have a lot of room to still go. And if the repetitions are very small, then you know that it is a limited, they're reaching fatigue or muscle failure. All right, so my first main part here is to give you a strong case to use estimated repetition to failure in resistance training. Don't worry, I've just got just probably another 2 or 3 slides for the next point. The next point is if you have technology, then you can use another measure, which is, okay, sorry, let me just, this is an email to Daniel Hackett, something that he has wrote here. Maybe I can just read. So he's going to do some more studies on correlating ERF with other factors such as velocity. He's going to measure muscle activation. He wants to also look at some blood markers and try to understand why is it that you are able to provide or a good ERF score. Okay, so he wants to look at some of these blood markers and other measurements. Right, so people who are interested to collaborate with Daniel Hackett for any future research, I think he's very open to this idea. Let me just move on to another tool which you can use, which probably, with especially in the national setup, the application of VBT, which is velocity-based training. I can probably, there are quite a lot of YouTube videos on VBT. I can probably send some to Dr. Saju and maybe he can forward to you guys. But let me just maybe, I'll just stop sharing this one. I'll just show you a very, very brief 10-second video. All right. And let me share a different screen. Okay, can you see this? Yep, I presume you can. And sorry. Okay, I think let me just do it a slow. All right, never mind. I think what I'll do, let me just drag this. So what happens is you have a device here which is linked to your phone. All right, and so you just put this. This is the sensor that detects the velocity, and as the subject moves, all right, you will get the gauge of the velocity, which is now here 0.6. okay? And as you get a different next repetition, all right, you get a movement velocity of 0.72. So that is kind of the average velocity or peak, sorry, the peak velocity that's been given for that particular repetition. And with different repetitions, you get all the different velocity being highlighted here. Okay. All right, so it's probably something very simple. Okay, close here, and let me just share my slides again. All right, so with VBT, it is actually a sensor base which you can place on the barbell itself. And every time you move or the repetitions that you doing, it will detect the speed. Okay, so speed or the velocity of your movement pattern. So with slow movement, with very slow movement, what you're going to get is sorry. Okay, so can you have a look at this graph? This. Okay, look at this one here. With so you have slow movements as in 1. So these are fast movements. Slow movements is 0.1 down here. So when you're reaching your max, okay, your maximum loads, the movement velocity is 0.1. Okay, very slow movement. Okay, at very much lighter loads, your movement velocity is much faster. Okay, so you have a 1.41 here. So this was an experiment that was done. So this subject's profiling, the project profiling is he's got a 1 RM of 110, and with each percent of 1 RM, they were detecting the velocity. All right, so you get very fast velocity with light loads, and as it goes down, you get much slower movement with heavy loads. So with this device and this equipment, what you can do is estimate whether the subject has reached his maximum capacity. So if you realize that he's doing something along the lines of 0.3 meter per second for his bench press, is approaching maximum load already. Of course, there are slightly differences between squats and bench press. With bench press, the subject is able to reach up to 0.15 with for the maximum load, and for squats is 0.3 for maximum loads. So this is just another tool that you can use to help estimate the intensity for your subjects. All right, so I'm going to end here. I think my time is also up for some questions. So feel free to ask, and maybe as a quick summary, I think what I've done here today is just to introduce, or perhaps you're already using these tools to monitor resistance training intensity. So you have on one hand the subjective measure, which is using the ERF method, or an objective measure using the velocity-based training, whereby you need some technology or device to be used upon. All right, thank you very much. I pass back the time to Dr. Saju.
All right, thank you, Dr. Victor, for having presented a very good information on velocity-based training and also on ERF. And yeah, I open the floor for questions. So if you have any questions for Dr. Selva Nayagam, yes, please do put in the chat box. Okay, there is one question actually. Which is the best device you recommend for measuring velocity?
Okay. I would, I mean, personally, I've not used so many devices. This is quite area, but one good device is known as the BEAST, BEAST. I can probably send some information through Dr. Saju, because it is also linked to your mobile apps, and you can also use it with the Android phones. I think in Malaysia, you know, a lot of the devices are only linked to the iPhones. So with this BEAST device, you can also use your Android phones if you have for one. However, with the BEAST device, not only you can use for the putting it on the barbells, but you can also have a vest where you can put the device on your back or on your arm, wrist, and any movement or even vertical jumps that you do, you're able to capture the velocity, which is also able to convert the velocity to power. Yeah, so I think, I mean, that would be one which I would probably recommend. I can't speak for many other devices, so there are quite a number out there.
Okay, there is another question from Praveen Nair. Velocity-based training would be used to estimate the 1RM on a particular day, or it can be used for even for other day training sessions also, same velocity.
Yes. Yep. So I would say it is actually, you're able to use it for different days. In fact, one of the interesting thing about VBT is feedback. So every time you move, you get the results, the feedback. So it gives you a very quick feedback whether you are consistent in your movement. Are you, because with sometimes when you do your training, you'll be surprised. Some movements are slower, some repetitions are faster. So you get a lot of variation. But with the this device, you get a very good feedback. So a day-to-day feedback of the current performance of the athletes. Let me see.
There's one question from Banit Sharma. Do we have specific norms for VBT for different sports?
So the slide that I showed you just now, the final slide, right? So that is the general guideline in terms of speed. They have not mapped out particular sports, but in general, they have divided it into 3 main categories. So speeds between more than 1 meter per second, between 1 to 0.6 meter per second, or anything faster than 0.6 meter per second. So there are various range that is recommended for different types of training. So when you talk about strength, then a corresponding output would be 85% of 1 RM. So that would be a much slower speed that you're talking about. So things along the lines of below 0.6 meter per second. So there are, in general, for strength gains, but not specific sports.
Okay, this is a general question. Now, while training for velocity, and if you want to maintain a particular velocity, what should be the command like to the athlete? Okay, whether you are controlling the speed or not?
Yeah, usually with speed, right? Of course, experience plays a very big role. So one thing about VBT technology, I would recommend for more experienced athletes, because of the nature that they are more experienced to perceive, ability to perceive, similar with when you ask them about their perceived exertion or so on, more experienced athletes have a little bit better ability. But command, if you talk about command, I would recommend or propose using something like a metronome. Are you familiar with a metronome? It's so you can download a metronome on your phone device. It is to do with the music scale. You know, you give them a beat, click, pop, 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 pop. So with this beat, I think it gives a very much better feedback and you get your athletes being more consistent. If you're going to leave it to the athletes, is slower or faster, there was quite one recent paper that sometimes athletes tend to underestimate some of the timing. So I would propose using something like a metronome to guide speed of movement.
Okay. Now, which is better actually, if you're using a gym machine or a barbell? Now, for example, in both the case, if you're doing velocity training, there is an acceleration, and towards the end phase, there is deceleration of the bar.
Yep,
so actually,
yes.
if you look into the execution part, the even before the maximum range is reached, that is limit is reached, you tend to reduce the speed.
Correct.
So some people have early inhibition of reducing the speed, and some. So how to or what methods are there to make this athletes? Now, for example, if I'm a shot put thrower, if I'm releasing, I have to continuously accelerate till the end point of release. So what could be your suggestions on this kind of velocity based training?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Saji, you brought a very good point, but a very difficult to answer question. With the device, right, you would have two types of measurement that is going to be on the device. One is the peak velocity. So the device captures what is your maximum speed or your peak speed. And then it also gives you the average speed. So like you mentioned, when you have a deceleration phase and so on, the device does not capture whether it's going to be a deceleration or an acceleration, but gives you an average speed. An isokinetic machine would be something that would give you this information. So through this whole angle of your movement, so there are different machines using having the similar dynamometers for force throughout the whole range of movement. I mean, that will give you definitely much more information for you to kind of manipulate. But in terms of training, I would say like the short part, I think getting the athletes to understand this execution of movement patterns, of course, with lighter loads first. Our body is also quite interesting. We want to be safe, so there's also a mismatch sometimes with athletes. We want them to move beyond what their body can achieve, but our body wants to protect us, so they don't want to injure. So what happens is this is where with athletes, with training, while you consider safety, you also want to train them to achieve their movement patterns that they require. I'm not sure whether I've answered your question, Doc, but just to give you an idea.
Yeah, there's one use of Carbonan formula.
Okay.
To measure intensity and volume of training. Can that formula also can be used for measuring?
So the formula is typically used for heart rate. The thing about heart rate is actually a little bit more global, the exertion. So it's very suitable for aerobic based training with heart rates. When you come to strength training, because what happens is your number of repetitions may be fairly low, but you may also exert very much on your heart rate levels, and what happens is you may not be able to. That's why there's kind of a bit of a mismatch here with muscle failure and heart rate values, and you also recover much faster. So I would say, in general, covenant method would be good for more aerobic type of training rather than strength training per se.
Okay. Right. There is one question, general question. This is Taekwondo athletes has to maintain the acceleration of the kick till the impact phase. Okay. So what kind of exercise are recommended in open kinetic chain or in closed kinetic change? What kind of exercise?
Okay. I mean, I would, of course, this is quite specific to the training itself. I would think of something along the lines of a release, for example, having a medicine ball, throwing the medicine ball, a release a little bit more open, to open chain, to allow the full execution of the motion, the movement. Yeah, I think this would probably be, what I would probably recommend. I don't have any specific answers for Taekwondo per se, but I think I would recommend that.
Okay. All right, Dr. Victor, we are running out of time. Probably the last question. This is from Gaurav Kaushik. Which velocity measure is better for monitoring adaptations or changes in Olympic weightlifting performance? Average or peak velocity measure?
Average or peak for, sorry, for what was it again? For
which velocity measure is better for monitoring adaptation or changes in Olympic weightlifting performance? Average velocity or peak velocity measure? Yeah.
I mean, I would say you have to use both measures. I think there's a reason why both measures are there. The issue with peak would be there's only at a very particular point, but on average is the whole execution of your movement. So we talk about there is a point of weakness where kind of similar to strength also. Sometimes you say peak strength or peak force, I'm able to execute at a very particular angle, but the other angles my force is much lower. And your outcome of your performance is usually dependent on your weaker link, which is so I would say your average force will be something quite critical to consider while just taking note of your peak force.
All right, Dr. Victor, thank you very much. It was indeed a very good presentation. And yeah, I mean, in fact, if you give time to our people, they will keep you engaged for a whole day. Anyway, thank you very much. Yeah, I hope that in future we could still continue our contacts, and I hope that you could also contribute a lot for Indian sporting people also, because actually we are looking for some people for as a external advisor or something like that for Indian sports. So probably a lot of collaborations can be done, and hope that you would be a part of it. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Victor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saju. In fact, I've been saying no for many opportunities, but when you call me, I said I have to say yes to you. So thank you. I'm very happy to contribute wherever I can. Thank you very much. Dr. Saju has been helping Malaysia a lot also. So time for me to help you guys. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.